Hello there. Well, once again, a slightly unceremonious beginning. I'm Scott Garner, and I will add our other participants, and we'll get started. So I will add Alex, and Rich, and Mark, and last but not least, Nandini, and I will pass it to Nandini to introduce the stream.
Hello, everybody. I'm Nandini, and I'm one of the many people, including several others here, who are part of CETI, a Creative and Emergent Technology Institute. We're really excited to have you join us for this conversation to hear from these amazing artists and technologists about a project they did that is really powerful and impactful. And I wanted to, this is sort of our launch day for a public sort of conversation around XRchive, our project that is sort of collaborative and participatory around using XR tools for storytelling around social justice and to address, in particular, the first iteration themes of migrations and displacement in Portland. I am really, the project is just starting, and over the spring we're going to have workshops, we're going to have creative building sessions, and we will have more speakers. So continue to follow us, subscribe to the YouTube channel, join us at the CETI Lab, which is at Portland State at the moment, and but also follow us, go to the website, CETI.institute, to sort of learn more about this project and ways to participate. But I am so excited and honored to sort of introduce Alex, Rich, and Mark, who've been working a collaboration between Invisible Thread and Performing Statistics. Alex has been sort of he's this amazing artist and technologist, does all sorts of incredible work. You'll learn more about him, and hopefully will one day be involved in some ways teaching something at CETI. But you'll hear more about this project and this collaboration. But I think what is really exciting about it is this like ongoing vision of using XR for social good that I see sort of permeating through a lot of Invisible Thread's work. And Alex, will you tell us a little bit more about it and this specific project called No Kids in Prison? Yeah.
Well, thank you, Nandini. I'm Alex Hessler. I'm one of the partners at Invisible Thread, and I'll talk a little bit about Invisible Thread. So we're an immersive design agency in Portland. We focus on social good and environmental projects, as well as kind of bringing new technology and kind of showing off what the latest technology can do for all kinds of different companies. A lot of our focus internally is around bringing very talented people together to produce kind of the best work that can be produced, from creative directors to artists to engineers, and we are focused on representing the talent of Portland and bringing that talent out into the wider world, and kind of present the talent of Portland as a cohesive studio to all of the different markets in the world. And Rich Moore is kind of one of the creative directors we love to work with. And one of the best kind of partnerships we've had over the years is with Performing Statistics. And Mark Stanquist is a creative director there. And one of the reasons we love working with Performing Statistics is that they have the heart and the connection with the community that can bring the messaging that it needs to be told to life. And then all Invisible Thread needs to do is kind of what we do best, which is to use the technology to communicate that messaging as best we can. And so I wanted to actually use this panel and this platform as a way to highlight the work that Mark has been doing, because it's such an important component to using immersive design for storytelling. Is kind of like the story itself. It has to start with the story. It has to start with the community. It has to start with the messaging and the people that need to be heard. And the technology is here to serve that. And so I'll pass the mic to Mark and let him introduce himself and Performing Statistics.
Thanks so much, Alex, and thank you all so much for having us. First of all, I'm on East Coast, and it's been a long day, so I apologize if I'm a little less than my best self. I will give my best 9 o'clock presentation I can. So yeah, I've had the honor. I started performing statistics with a bunch of folks in 2014, and we're going to show a bunch of slides of our many different kinds of art and technology and public art projects we've done over the years. But it's been such an honor to work with Invisible Thread to really take some of like the deep community-based art and organizing work we've been doing to a scale that we never imagined through some of these sort of mixed reality projects we've been doing. So Alex, I don't know if you wanted to start the slideshow and then I can sort of talk through some of this. Amazing. So even just like the title of this, Imagine a World Where All Youth Are Free, I think part of the huge reasons that one of the many reasons we use art is because, you know, we really see art as the essential foundation for, you know, creating a different kind of blueprint for how we exist in society, how we exist together, how do our systems work, how could they work better. And from the beginning, No Kids in Prison or Performing Statistics was really about like looking at young folks who are in the system, young folks who are currently incarcerated, not as sort of problems in society, but as young folks with amazing insights and knowledge and potential, and connecting them with a multitude of creative experts to amplify their voices and dreams. And Alex, feel free to sort of like flow through the slides at whatever pace feels good. So the first question we asked was, you know, if young folks who are incarcerated were in charge of the movements to transform our criminal justice systems, what would they do different? And how could artists and advocates and technologists and designers support those young folks to make their dreams become a reality? Why is this issue important? This issue is important because a huge amount of young folks are locked up at any given day. So this number's actually gone down a ton over the past decade, but on any given night, there's 40,000 young folks locked up in prisons, not including juvenile jail cells. The cost to incarcerate a young person in this country varies per state. In many states, it's over $200,000 per young person per year. I spent $15,000 to go to school. So I'm just like, do that math really quick and think about how those investments could be radically transformed to have way better impacts. Because when you look at, we spend this much money as a country to incarcerate young folks and take them away from many opportunities and communities. The recidivism rate, which means the percentage that young folks, once they're released, end up back in the system, is over 70% in many states. Which, when I think about this from if you think about it from a business model, if your business failed 70% of the time, would you still be in business? And yet we allow these broken systems to continue. These systems also disproportionately impact youth of color, LGBTQ youth, and youth with disabilities. So that was sort of like when we were first starting in 2014, that was the crisis, right? And so we were trying to think about, okay, we can look at this from a numbers perspective, but really at the core, we have to start from the human story and really sort of understand that, like, if politicians, if the general population is going to allow these things to happen, part of this is because they're not seeing each other's full humanity. And, we have seen countless decades of stories be told about communities impacted by the criminal justice system without their input, without their feedback, without their direction. And we wanted to sort of flip that. So what the projects looked like for 8 years is actually having a program where young folks can leave the detention center, come to a space where there are no guards, where they're learning a multitude of art skills from photography and film, silkscreen, poetry, using some of like the oldest art forms, as well as learning how to do virtual reality installations, music videos, interactive murals, and all sorts of things. Throughout the summer, young folks are working not only with incredible artists and advocates, but also, one thing that I always try to say, I know part of this conversation was because some folks in Portland were excited to do something similar, was like, always ask the question, who's missing? Who needs to be in the room to make this an incredible experience for the community that you're working with? And so for us, that meant we need top-notch artists. We need incredible, organizers and lawyers and advocates who can really help the young folks speak to the issue. But we also need formerly incarcerated mentors. We need people to be trained on trauma. So really thinking about who's in the room is as important as what you're creating yourself. And I think because we've spent so much time really investing in making healthy environments for our workshops to happen, it's meant that the work is continuously healing centered, future focused, and about sort of lifting up the dreams of young folks. So you're seeing more examples of some of the art that young folks have created. And one thing that's been important is that we spend the whole summer making all of this art. So for us, one thing that's really important is that for young folks, for any community you're working with, if you're going to ask them to share their story and you're going to work with them to share their story, it's a huge honor and a huge responsibility. And part of that responsibility is thinking really strategically and intentionally and equitably about how are those stories shared. And so we've always thought about, like, we don't want a person to come to one of our installations and be able to keep their distance. If you want to see these stories, we don't want this ever to be poverty porn or some sort of fetishized, extractive kind of storytelling process. We want people to have to step up and really step into these stories and really engage with them deeply. And so this next slide you'll see, that was one of the first sort of art and technology installations we created, where we worked with youth technologists to program these audio installations where there are photos of young folks with their hands like a family visiting booth in a youth prison, and there's just a small Raspberry Pi behind the plexiglass with a sensor that, if you want to hear the youth story, you have to hold your hand on their hand, and the sensor triggers the audio. The moment you let go, the story stops. If you keep it going, you hear an incredibly powerful 15-minute audio piece. And so thinking about strategic ways that simple, very basic computing technology can create really powerful experiences. If part of the issue, when you mentioned earlier about migration and immigration, part of the issue, right, is about distance, and is about not only physical distance, but the sort of distances we put on each other, the way that we separate each other. How do we use art and technology and story to create connections, both real and digital, or physical and digital? And so, throughout these different projects, we've always tried to find ways that people have to step up, have to really engage the stories to really hear them. The next slide you'll see is actually the former police chief of Richmond going through the virtual reality film that the young folks in our program created. After the chief went through it, he wanted all of his officers to see this and go through the exhibit. And so our exhibit not only has reached thousands of people, but it's become a training tool to train police officers, social workers, teachers, politicians. So really thinking about art installations and exhibits, whether they're public art or in physical spaces, as these platforms or stages where many, many different people can be coming through. And one thing I'm always thinking about is how do you think about those spaces really intentionally through programming to make sure that you're not just speaking to the choir, but you're really reaching out and connecting to the right people. The next slide is a few more sort of moments from some of those police trainings where officers were going through a myriad of stories that young folks had told and created. And then after that, learning from trauma specialists, hearing from family members who've had kids in the system, hearing about de-escalation tactics. Alex, did you want to talk anything about the VR?
I thought I could throw in a little the geeky technical stuff here and there, just in terms of this experience. What we did was we did a photogrammetry scan of one of the prison cells and recreated that at scale. So when you put on the headset, you are sitting in the prison cell. Everything is as it is, and it's striking how claustrophobic and small they are. And then the experience itself is hearing the audio stories and the projecting artwork of the youth on the walls around you. And it's a few minutes long, and it kind of walks you through kind of the mental sort of internal monologue of what it's like to be there, and it creates an enormous amount of empathy, and it just really drives home like what a lost opportunity it is to put these kids in these rooms and like lock them away. And I think it's a hugely impactful experience.
And to like add to that, like one thing that we've, I think making the VR was huge because it gave us a tool, right, that we could like use in all these different forms. But we, from the beginning, we're also really intentional about like, well, what is the physical space in which the person, a viewer, is engaging this digital content? And so like, as you see in this image, this police officer is actually in a plexiglass jail cell. They're sitting on an actual bed in various, this is set up. This was a super sort of flexible version of the installation where this was literally in a library basement. So we were able to bring it all over. But thinking about like, I often think like, there is sort of this sort of tension between making things hyper accessible that you can like literally like chill on your couch and hear about, this intense experience. Is that the right space for this kind of story? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. I think like for us, it was important that for folks to step into the incredible experience that Alex and others helped create with the young folks, like that we wanted to almost like guide people to that moment and guide them out of it. And I think having that hybrid of this immensely immersive technology with a physically immersive space was really helpful at kind of making both ways of working even more powerful. It's also been really important for us to sort of think about moving beyond the gallery and always making sure that we're getting the work out into people who need to see it. So we've toured the work in a bunch of different places. This is at a museum in LA. The next slide is we actually have for years done a parade with a bunch of advocates where T-shirts and posters and protest signs and banners that young folks in our programs created, as well as like protest slogans that they wrote, were then literally sung and wore and held by hundreds of people who would march down the street. We also done installations outside of state capitals and all kinds of places. So really thinking about like, we've shown our work in museums and galleries and universities, and that's huge. But sometimes like the church basement, sometimes the city street is the right place. So, I think being agnostic of, I think there's moments where these traditional art spaces are really useful. And there's moments when they can be self-selecting, and it's important to sort of go beyond them. And I think that is really where like some of the larger projects that we've gone to work with Invisible Thread came from, is wanting to feel like we could speak beyond the choir and really reach an audience at scale, which gets us to Freedom Constellations, which Freedom Constellations is a series of different public art projects and sort of larger digital experiences that we've created over the past couple of years, all around the idea of using art and technology to imagine a world where all youth are free. And it started during the pandemic with a mural project we did with an awesome group of young folks, where we created a mural directly across the street from the police station that dreamed of a world where every kid has what they need to thrive and stay free. So again, thinking about where you're doing the work is as important as what you're creating. Not only is that important to me because it means that police officers, every day they go to work, they see these beautiful portraits of young folks that are in their community. But also that, strategically, it means that press, for better or worse, are going to like, that's a line that they're going to really sink into. And it is important to get press on these projects because they help drive people to it. And they help, as you'll see, get other partners, both civic and funders and others interested in scaling up these ideas. So I'm going to actually I'll drop some of these links into the chat so folks can see them afterwards. But there's some amazing documentation of this mural project, which is a great example of, you can't really see in this image, but to the portraits, you have Kayla here on the left, Kadaya, Ayana, Ka, and Tadrima, and under each of their portraits, there's a speaker with a sensor that 12 and 13-year-olds programmed at a program called Code VA that are baked in, that have sensors baked into them. So as you stand in front of their mural, the portraits come alive, both with these like lights that sort of go around them, and also these audio stories that start speaking to you. So the walls literally talk to you. And this mural, I got to do the photos and all the poetry with the young folks, and worked with our friend Kate DeCiccio to help the young folks create all the beautiful visuals behind their portraits. And this mural also included augmented reality, which, you know, you would hit a QR code and you could like sort of look around you, and parts of the mural kind of came alive. And we baked in a bunch of different videos and audio parts as well through QR codes. So thinking about, this was sort of like an early investigation of like, how could we use public art to really connect to a bunch of these new technologies. Right as the pandemic hit, we were about to launch a huge national tour called No Kids in Prison. And then, you know, surprisingly, doing a national tour full of virtual reality headsets and small confined spaces that people would have to interact with things was a really bad idea in March of 2020. So we thankfully reconnected with Alex and his team, and we're like, well, what if we took this physical exhibit and turned it into a website that walked a viewer through the history of youth incarceration, to the impact on young folks, to the impact on families, and ended in a place where all youth are free. And Rich was like a huge part of this project as well, and also the folks at Oblio, which is a web experience. But Rich, you want to talk about some of like the early sort of brainstorming sessions?
Yeah, sure. So I would be happy to just let Mark do the whole presentation. I think he's doing a great job. But I did the sketches, so I guess I should talk about them. I was really sort of a little overwhelmed at creating an online experience that told the story of everything I thought Performing Statistics wanted to, you know, just tell the complete story about the history, the current state of things, and what a possible future could look like. And it's a really, really dense experience, and there's so much in it. And so it took a fair amount of work to try and organize that in a way that was easy to navigate and made it all seem digestible. One thing that I was kind of impressed about is how much of the assets were created by the youth, and how much, I mean, we had just folders and folders of posters and just an immense amount of artwork created by youth who were impacted by youth prisons. So I just thought that was kind of an amazing treasure and starting point for all this. The other thing that I wanted to point out is I felt like Performing Statistics, even though they had all this content, they weren't overly prescriptive about what I felt like we were partners from the beginning, and they sort of took us along for the ride and let us learn about all of these issues, and kind of help create a way to tell that story when the temptation would be to say, I already know this story, here's what I want you to do. And I felt like they were interested in helping us learn and partner with them to try and tell it in the best way possible. So these were just some sketches about kind of the three main phases: the past, or like the introduction, the past, and then the present, and then the current future state, or the current state, and then that current state sort of falls apart, and out of that grows a possible future state without youth prisons.
I mean, it's also like so cool to see. I mean, I'm sure a lot of folks know how long these projects take. So this was like an 8 8 months before it was ever like made, you know, into a real thing. And it's pretty awesome to see, Rich, like these original, you know, renderings, I feel like are really true to where it ended too. So, and to your point, I think that like one strategy I think that's always been important to us is that we view our projects not as like vehicles, right? Like that, you know, I always want to be involved in projects where like this is about, you know, widening who's involved, widening who could be a partner, a collaborator, a participant, a viewer, and that sort of less of like a contractual relationship, like you're just here to do this thing for me, and more like we are like the project becomes a vehicle for us all to sort of understand this issue in a deeper way, to understand each other in a deeper way, to understand how we can use our skills in these like mutually beautiful ways. So thank you. That like really that is the goal.
And I want to just add to that one of the really striking things about this project was that we never wanted to highlight the problem as the primary thing that's being communicated. It was always about what do we want to be in the world? What is the solution? What is the future that we want? And just holding that as the focal point of the art, which I think is something that I think we all need right now. There's so much focus on what's wrong, and the media loves to kind of clickbait all of us into like getting outraged. But having something that really kind of inspires and pulls people together and pulls people from different communities to learn about something, to like learn about each other, is what made some of this work so important.
So the other thing I really learned on both of these projects that we're going to be presenting is how, and this is 100%, I learned this from Mark, but just how to, you know, the youth are the clients here. They're everything. They're the topic of every conversation, every decision that's made. It's how to tell their story respectfully, and how to solve a problem for them. I never felt like this was, let's make performing statistics this cool group, or it was always about the youth, 100%. And so that's, I'm used to thinking about clients and like, oh, clients are, you know, what would the client want? But this was something else. This was really impressive.
You guys are gonna make me blush at 9:30 on the East Coast. Yeah. Yeah. So here's some slides. Thank you guys. The feeling is mutual for real. Here's some slides from the different spaces. I dropped a link to the full experience in there. It's like Rich said, it's a dense experience, but it's like so worth it. It's one of those ones where you could go through at your own pace and be done in like 15-20 minutes, or you could spend an hour in there and investigate all the different components. And we're trying to work more and more with like teachers and other folks who can really use this as a tool to sort of deepen understanding and conversations in the classrooms and workshops and all kinds of spaces. So it's free and open to use, and it ends with a ton of calls to action and ways that folks can get involved, and some beautiful free downloadable art, which I think is the next slide. Let's see. Yeah, we worked with a bunch of incredible artists around the country to like transform parts of the web experience into these posters that are free to download. So that's at the very end if you get there. But last but not least, we're going to talk about the City Hall installations, which I think is the largest interactive public art project on a government building in the country. I think that's right. That's what City Hall in Richmond is saying. They may just be saying that because they want it to be true, but let's just say it is. But in the physical world, it's two giant portraits of Tadrima and Clyde McBride on Richmond City Hall, where the mayor and city council and city workers are every day. It can be seen from Highway 95 and 64. It can be seen from miles away. And they're 270-foot tall portraits that, when you use your phone, come even more alive through augmented reality. Literally what happens is, as you're holding your phone above their portraits, in the clouds and in the sky above City Hall, the dreams of young folks imagining this better future are playing in the clouds above and around their portraits. Which, again, when we're thinking about, when folks are thinking about their projects, like, the reason we wanted to talk about where we came from to get to this point was, maybe at this point you could just ask City Hall to do something and it would happen. But it did take many years, and it did take a lot of relationship building, partnership building, trying out different strategies to get to this point. And I think that that sort of commitment is also really important, and just like a way to sort of thank all the many people who have made this project possible. But in the nutshell, actually, do you mind going back a couple of slides? Thank you so much. We started with just sort of a concept, like, what could this look like? We had worked with a bunch of different young folks to write this poem, imagining this better world. And Tadrima and Clyde were two advocates, or are two advocates in Richmond, who are advocating to end youth incarceration. And we worked with both of them to storyboard. They both looked at the poem that they had helped write with a bunch of different young folks, and they chose different lines. And then, Rich, do you want to talk a little bit about sort of the storyboarding process? Because really we went from, their poem, Tadrima and Clyde came up with their beautiful sort of ideas, and then Rich really worked with them and with their full team to sort of make their ideas, their animation ideas, a reality.
Yeah, Alex, we go back to slide 30. Just stay there for a while. So in a lot of ways, this is my favorite image from the project. So this is a storyboard that Tadrima did. And at first, I think it was just going to be Tadrima. And so you have these buildings that are all in chains, and then they kind of break away, and then this natural growth sort of grows out of them and creates this beautiful future state. And so I thought this was amazing, and I was really intimidated about how to translate this to something that could be visible in an AR installation. And so CJ, who's the other portrait, my favorite part of this whole process was Mark and I called CJ, and Mark worked with CJ to describe. He didn't want to draw the storyboard, but he was happy to talk about it, and so Mark worked with him to get him to describe what he thought the future state would look like, and I was drawing it while he was describing it, and then we showed it to him, and he's like, yeah, that looks good. He seemed happy with it. I wasn't too thrilled with the drawing, that's why I didn't include it, but it was really cool to let them. Again, everything was driven by the youth, and so to let them storyboard it out and then try and translate that into, it's too bad the ballpoint pen drawings were too thin and faint. You wouldn't see them, but to translate that into something that would work was really fun. So yeah, then we just did some crude mock-ups of just trying. The poem had kind of this nice story arc where they start kind of by describing the problem, and then they talk about. The poem will make you cry every time you listen to it, but then they talk about how they would kind of do things differently and how they saw things transforming, and then they describe kind of this wonderful future without youth prisons. So, and then we used as much of, we used as much of their artwork as we could. So this is Tadrima's little cityscape that she did for the mural. And then if you look on the right is a screenshot from the experience, and you can see in her hands when this like future state's growing out of the ashes of the old buildings. We were able to use that artwork again. It's kind of in her hand, cradling it.
Which I think is like a super important point, because like, you know, when you're sort of, I always think about things in concentric circles, and like if you start with that, if you create the right team initially and you start with the right foundation, things become more iterative and iterative and iterative. And like the way we did the mural, not only was it like an awesome experience for Tadrima in the way that she wanted to stay involved, and then we've been working together for years now, but like you can even think about, well, how are these elements, how do they sort of live in different spaces, and not having to start from, you know, scratch every time. So I think just like a testament to just sort of, you know, doing it intentionally, doing it right first time, it just sort of grows from there, which is really beautiful.
And then so on the next slides is these are the screenshots from the actual artwork that we used. And I mean, it's all either artwork that was partially created, entirely created by the youth, or it was my trying to copy their artwork, basically. Alex, will you go to the next one? So you can tell, oh, in the first, so it starts out black and white, really grainy. On Alex, sorry, go back to slide 33. So it starts out really black and white, grainy, kind of raw, and then we add layers and layers of color, and as the experience goes from current state to future state. Next one, Alex. And so then by the end you have just lots of layers of color and bright, beautiful shapes and objects. And I mean, Mark said this, but you really can see these banners I felt like you could see them from anywhere in Richmond. It's like, oh, you can see a corner of it from pretty much, we walked all over, and I felt like we could see it from any vantage point.
And when, you know, like when you're working at this scale, it means like some incredible partnerships come from there. So we've been able to work with a bunch of different museums to sort of co-organize tours where they're not only able to sort of like bring a bunch of people down to do the experience, but actually, you know, we have historic museums talking about the history of redlining in Richmond, or talking about the history of slavery in Richmond, or talking whatever certain histories that connect to this moment, right? And so it's been a really beautiful example of like working at scale creates opportunities that, you know, oftentimes we never would have had. And for viewers, it's meant that they've been able to like access the past and get to a point where they do the experience and they're able to enter into the future, which has been such like an incredible sort of outcome of this.
I guess we can show a little bit. Should we play back the experience? It's so I'll get my audio set up here. One moment.
In the world without youth prisons,
In the world without youth prisons,
I walk down the street and
I hear happiness in the community.
I feel safe. No fear,
No violence.
No cries.
no cries, no sirens. I see communities thriving, outreach available, happiness,
Happiness.
positivity. Children being healed instead of hurt. Families growing together.
Instead of being torn apart.
Cycles and chains are being diminished.
I see a community that is working to build
That is working to build
with the people
with the people
rather than against them.
rather than against them.
Youth getting the help they ask for, people being cared for.
people who are free and able to solve community problems.
I see youth becoming who they are destined to be. I see money that would have been going toward putting youth in cages that is now being put into the school system, into jobs, into support for kids.
We can love ourselves.
We can shape our future.
We can finally heal.
We are together. We are safe.
We are free.
There you go. And I thought we wanted to share this as it actually worked at night, and I thought it was actually really beautiful over the cityscape at night. It has like a really nice, pops out and looks beautiful with the colors at night. I'll play this while we talk. I don't think I'll have audio, but.
In the world without youth prisons.
In the world without youth prisons.
I'll mute that. I wanted to give a quick shout out to the team at Invisible Thread: Annie Pomerantz, Zach Roberts, Daniel Chamberlain, and Christian Smolinski. We had worked really hard to kind of bring this one to life, and I think it was super successful.
I kind of want to jump in here, but it's hard to know where to start. So first I want to ask the three of you, have you covered all your slides? Are you ready to kind of open it up a little bit?
We could go, I could do, I mean, we have a few left. I don't know if I could jump into, have a few technical things I could show, but I could save those for Q&As as well.
Yeah, actually, I mean, one thing I do want to say is I think actually it would be great to just superficially, quickly, just to talk about the technical aspect of things, because I'm sure there's people watching this wondering, like, how do you even do this? Like, what's the technology involved? But yeah, again, it's a lot to respond to. It's an incredibly inspiring project, even a little intimidating for people watching this, people associated with the CETI, with the XRchive project that we're kind of kicking off. This is an incredibly inspiring project in that realm. Like it's kind of a touchstone piece in the kinds of things. It's one of our kind of premier examples of it, but it's kind of daunting because, I mean, the production quality, but the fact that you had the youth so involved with them producing assets, it's almost hard to even fathom how all that comes together. So I think to try to phrase that as a question, I want to circle back to just a few things that got mentioned. So one of the things, Alex, I think you mentioned was not making it just about the problem, which I think is really interesting, an interesting thing to do. So you don't actually, I mean, as miserable as the situation is and how discouraging it can be, there's nothing sort of discouraging about the resulting work, or at least where it ends. It ends in sort of a positive view for the future. So I think that is really interesting as far as where that focus came from is to, I mean, honestly, I was a little surprised, and I don't quite know how to put this, but it was, I mean, seeing the police officers use it, for example, without it having kind of seemingly any element of hostility towards the police themselves, seems like, I would say, an achievement to do that, to kind of address this problem in a way that leaves room for inclusion from law enforcement. And another thing I wanted to mention, Mark, that you mentioned was, along those lines, the almost insistence on participation from the people experiencing it. So I really liked what you said about it not being poverty porn, people not being allowed to keep a distance. If you're gonna, it's not just a passive observation, it's kind of a participation, which I think is incredibly a powerful place to start, but also seems really challenging, especially, I mean, in my mind, again, with the police officers, that the people that you're forcing the inclusion from are people that some might argue are part of the problem. You know, how do you navigate those things? It seems almost impossible to kind of accomplish all of these things, yet it seems like you have done so.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say that. I mean, I think anybody in the system is part of the problem.
Of course.
Saying that they're not. But I also think they're human beings, and like I think that what I would say is that I think that if we had delivered a VR headset to a bunch of police officers and said, do this experience because we think you know, whatever, it would have fallen so flat. And I think that the way in which we presented it, the context that we created, the space, the physical space that we created, allowed for this digital experience to be transformative. Who was in the room when that happened? There was a ton of people who made that experience possible. I don't want this to feel daunting. This project started 8 years ago with a $5,000 grant that I used for a year, didn't pay myself, worked at a coffee shop and lived in a punk house, all these things to make ends meet. But what I would say is that I know people in Portland specifically who could do a lot of components of this now. They don't have the tech side of it. They have the long-term community organizing, they have the long-term teaching, they have the long-term community building side of it. And I think what I would say is that I really do believe that every city, every community has an immense amount of skill sets. And I think what we've done maybe uniquely well is that we have sort of asset mapped and really thought strategically about who's missing, who needs to be in the room, how can we bring those folks together to create something collectively that, to Rich said, was not about like, we're just going to transactionally use your skills to do this thing. You remain separate, but bring people meaningfully in to the process. And so I would just say that, like, I think that anybody could do this, and we're happy to help folks sort of think through that process and support that process or be involved in that process. And also I think that there's a ton of people in Portland that could help make anything like this happen, if not even better. And but I also just think, to your other question about sort of like I think about sort of like the distance and like asking people to participate. Like, I just, I think we passively engage and consume so much information already that I just know that if we're going to do something, that's just not, we're just going to try to do something different. And I think that part of the way in which it's worked is that we're pairing the physical with the digital, and that if we were just relying on one medium, it wouldn't hit there. And I think that having something at this scale and thinking about partnership, thinking about programming, some of the other slides that we have in here, we've done like bus wraps and other sort of public interventions to try to get the same messaging that's on City Hall all the way across the city. So really thinking about how, you don't just rely on one sort of strategy, but you think really sort of in an integrated way about how could you get the messaging out in as many places as possible.
I just want to say, sorry, just one. So in terms of like involving police, if you look at some of the other stuff that Performing Statistics has done, they have people from prisons talking about why youth prisons need to be eliminated, and I feel like that's probably a big part of their success is their work. They work with people like they're humans. And at the beginning, I remember the first call we had, and I like a lot of my ideas fell into very common traps that people fall into. And I didn't feel any, there may have been some disappointment or hostility, but I never felt any sort of negativity from them. I always felt like it's like they were, like I said before, bringing me along with the process and helping me kind of get up to speed and working toward this. It always felt very optimistic and very inclusive of pretty much everybody. I never felt like it was attacking anybody.
So I want to follow up on that, maybe ask one last question. I think this conversation could go on for hours, and hopefully it will, just maybe not stream all of it. That this is the first of many sort of collaborations that engagement we have with all of you. But I wanted you to, so the technology, XR seems like a technology that is suited to this notion of things being in place out in the world and pairing that physical and digital. And I was hoping, Alex, maybe you could talk a little bit about that and how the choices you made, and that we talked about the creative choices, but also technical. But the other form of participation I really appreciated how the youth were engaged in crafting the story and influencing the direction of the project. But I'm also curious, how were there opportunities, and how many of these youth now feel that they could absorb and make some of their own work? Like, part of our goals is also to sort of say that these tools and these technologies, and both creative and technical, are powerful tools, and we would do many more interesting things with them if a more diverse sort of community got to engage with them as creators, not just as consumers. And I'm curious if that aspect sort of, your thoughts on that aspect of it, and how that.
Yeah.
sort of-
Well, to that last point, I mean, we're talking to Code VA and a couple other folks in Richmond that are working with like high school age students, teaching them the technology, and we've come up with a few ideas for kind of, I guess you could say, bite-sized examples of this stack of technology that could be used for folks to kind of create their own experiences and put them around the city, and it not have to be kind of like centralized through a group like Invisible Thread, and we can become kind of trainers and teachers that way, which I think is really exciting. In terms of kind of our approach, I think the number one factor is accessibility. We wanted folks to be able to, anyone with a smartphone could bring it up and play the experience, and that has been traditionally a issue with some of this newer technology like augmented reality. There is a way to do really amazing things if you download a custom application, and you have to get that application in the store, and you have to have the internet connection to download it, and there's all these little issues. If you create an experience using that technology, not very many people will watch it. So we wanted to make sure it was something that could run just in a web browser on any fairly modern smartphone. And we settled on Eighth Wall as a platform, so to be specific. And that has on the right is like their editor. It's a kind of a WebGL platform that has a number of really nice features for augmented reality in it, which allow you to essentially author an experience. So the viewport is Maya viewport, but you could do the same thing in Blender, and we actually did use Blender quite a lot. So just off-the-shelf software, kind of can keyframe animate, make things move around, make them look nice, and then export them in a format that can be read into Eighth Wall. And then it is actually just a web page that plays back. So what wasn't necessarily easy, but I think given that we were doing a lot of this technology for the first time, there's a lot of trial and error, and I think we would do it again. It'll be a lot easier next time. So I think this is very accessible to folks. The Blender's free. Eighth Wall has a free tier for non-commercial use. So all of these things, no dollars. It's just time and thinking and planning. So. Yeah.
Great. And Nandini, any other things?
We do have lots of youth here who would love to learn some of this. So if you want to prototype or pilot any of the trainings, or we'd love to sort of collaborate on it. And I'm really excited to think about it and to hear about how it's going in Virginia. But I also, one other piece that is unique and interesting, I think, about your project is that you're using some very sophisticated sort of cutting edge technologies, but you've created a really sort of active, integrated sense of a mix of sort of generations of skill sets, of levels of expertise, and yet everyone felt like they had sort of shared ownership of that. And what would be your advice for anyone starting off in that direction, trying to do something like that?
My advice, if you're learning the technology side, just spend the time to really get into it, really learn it, really be passionate about it. And then once you've gotten to a point where you can make stuff pretty easily, eat a lot of humble pie, because the people that you're going to work with know way more than you do about maybe that technology, but more importantly about the things that, like in this example, like Mark is always flooring me with his ability to communicate and navigate and tell the stories of the kind of experiences he's worked with. And I'm always feeling like my job is to serve that message. It's not to like be the smartest guy in the room. I think it's always important to like think about the group and the communication of the group and the needs of the group, the needs of the audience that you're trying to serve, and not get too caught up in your own expertise. Like just think about being of service. And I think that approach with working with Performing Statistics and Rich and the other folks that we've worked with, everyone's been on the same page that way. And it's just been such a pleasure. Even when things go wrong or they're going a little sideways, we can laugh about it. And like we were trying to grab dinner and we ended up at Mark's place eating pizza, and like it was raining and it was perfect. And so like just kind of roll with the punches and try and create together.
It was really good pizza too. It wasn't
just right, yeah. Well, thank you all so much. This has been an incredibly powerful, and please everybody go and watch these experiences. We'll add links to them everywhere we can. And we did have we'll try to set the VR up in the lab again so people can, anybody in the community, if you're sort of interested in coming and experiencing it, will absolutely. But thank you all so much for sharing this. This has been incredibly inspiring, and hopefully will sort of be a little guide us through this project as we embark on it. So I never know how to end. How does one end a stream?
I know it's so bad because it's so hard on StreamYard. So I'll be the one to unceremoniously end the stream. Mark, thank you so much for joining us from the East Coast. I know it's like really appreciate it. Alex and Rich, thank you so much. Nandini, lovely to see you as always. And so I will kick.
And we'll all maybe be backstage for a second.
Yes, after I kick you out, hang on for 1 minute. I will throw up the CETI.institute link. Other links are in the chat, performingstatistics.org.
And go to XRchive on the CETI page. So you can join if you want to join the project in any way. Yeah, there's a registration link, and we would love more partners and people with. So please do join.
Yes, and finally, nokidsinprison.org to view the experience. So thank you all so much, and until next time.